From forgotten kings to infamous rulers, from fearless visionaries to ruthless tyrants, they shaped our world, one decision at a time. Welcome to Those Who Led, the stories behind history's boldest leaders. We enter into the late 18th century, South India. The sky is an angry bruise, black clouds boiling over a battlefield that smells like wet gunpowder and fear. You hear drums, not the polished parade ground type. These are war drums, low, relentless, like a heartbeat you can't ignore. And then, it happens. From the horizon, a sudden streak of fire cuts through the rain. It's not musket fire. It's not cannon shot. It's something else. A roaring arc of flame. A living serpent of smoke, screaming toward the British lines. It explodes in a burst of sparks and shrapnel, right in the middle of their formation. Men dive for the ground, cursing. Horses rear and bolt. Officers are shouting orders that no one can hear over the panic. And here's the thing. This isn't Europe in 1916. This isn't the trenches of the Somme or the rocket batteries of World War II. This is India in the 1790s. And those rockets, they belong to a king. A man who calls himself the Tiger of Mysore. A king who refuses to kneel to the British Empire. A king who sees them not as an unstoppable force, but as an infestation that can be burned out, one fiery arc at a time. His name is Tipu Sultan. He is a visionary, a modernizer, a warrior who brings science to the battlefield before most of the world even knows what modern means. And, depending on who you ask, he is also a tyrant, a zealot, a ruler who could be as ruthless to his enemies as he was loyal to his cause. But here's the part the British really couldn't stop talking about. Before the rockets of Napoleon. Before the rockets of the War of 1812. Before the first great industrial war machines, there were his rockets. Crude by today's standards, terrifying by theirs. Steel tubes packed with powder, mounted on bamboo poles, spitting fire into the night. Weapons that made the British officers write home about the sheer chaos they caused. Weapons that would inspire, and be copied by, the very empire they were meant to destroy. And if you think that's interesting, you should hear the story of the man who built them. Before the rockets, before the sieges, before the Tiger of Mysore entered into British nightmares. It began just as all our great figures of history begin, with just a boy. November 1751. Devanahalli, a small town near what we'd call Bangalore today. The air is thick with the smell of spice and earth, but also tension. This is South India in the 18th century. Kingdoms rising and falling faster than you can keep track. That boy is named Tipu. Not just Tipu though, Tipu Sultan. Named in honor of the Sufi Saint Tipu Mastan Aulia. A name that would carry weight. And his father. His father isn't just some minor noble. His father is Hyder Ali, a man who started as a soldier and clawed his way up to become the ruler of Mysore. A man who didn't inherit power, but took it. Tipu grows up in an atmosphere where war isn't some distant thing you read about. It's the family business. His childhood, if you can even call it that, is filled with Persian poetry and Arabic scripture, but also lessons in military strategy, horseback riding, and the art of marksmanship. Imagine learning to read and then immediately learning how to command cavalry. That's the kind of upbringing we're talking about. By the age of 15, barely a high schooler in our world today, he's already riding with his father's armies. Not as a ceremonial mascot, but as someone expected to contribute. Picture this teenager, wrapped in silk and steel, watching battles unfold not from a safe distance, but from the front lines, dust and gunpowder in his lungs. This is where he earns his first reputation. He's not just another prince, he's bold. Too bold, maybe. And it's in these early campaigns that people start whispering the nickname that will stick for the rest of his life. the Tiger of Mysore. Not because it sounds cool, though, as far as names in history go it does, but because on the battlefield, he moves with the kind of confidence and ferocity you only see in those apex predators. Fast, decisive, and absolutely unwilling to back down. He's growing up in a world where power belongs to those who take it, and Tipu Sultan is learning exactly how. By the mid-1760s, Tipu is no longer the promising son of Hyder Ali. He's becoming a weapon in his own right, and the timing couldn't be more perfect or more dangerous, because the British East India Company is moving in. Now, if you're picturing the British at this time as just a bunch of soldiers in red coats marching around, you're missing the real monster here. The East India Company isn't just a business. It's a business with an army, a corporation with cannons, and its appetite for Indian territory is endless. Tipu sees them first in the First Anglo-Mysore War, 1767 to 1769. He's a teenager, still in his late teens, riding with his father. But here's the thing. This isn't some tag-along-and-watch deal. He's commanding cavalry units, in the thick of it. And the British are getting a taste of what's coming. They expect Indian cavalry to be light, to be quick, but not decisive. Instead, they find Tipu's forces punching holes in their lines. He's fast, unpredictable, and seems to understand that you don't just fight the British head-on. You harass them, you exhaust them, you make them bleed for every step. It's also here that Tipu starts forming his opinion of them. And spoiler alert, it's not flattering. He sees the company for what it is. Not just a rival, but a long-term threat to every Indian ruler. By the time the Second Anglo-Mysore War rolls around in 1780, Tipu isn't just a side player anymore. He's a commander, a problem for the British. Picture this. The British march into Mysore territory thinking they can box him in, and instead, he outmaneuvers them, over and over. He takes fortresses. He cuts supply lines. He even manages to bag entire detachments of British troops. It's during these years that his skill as a tactician really becomes clear. He's not reckless. He's patient. He understands terrain, timing, and, most importantly, morale. He knows how to make the enemy feel like they're losing even when they still technically hold the field. And remember, this is all before he even becomes king. Tipu Sultan is still operating under his father's banner, but the shadow he's casting, it's already long enough to make the British nervous. The man who will become the Tiger of Mysore isn't just growing, he's sharpening his claws, and when his father dies, those claws are going to be aimed squarely at the empire on his doorstep. 1782. The Second Anglo-Mysore War is still grinding on, a brutal seesaw fight between Mysore and the British East India Company. And in the middle of it, the unthinkable happens. Hyder Ali, the man who clawed his way up from military officer to ruler of Mysore, is dead. Now, imagine this for Tipu. You're in your early 30s. You've spent your entire life learning the art of war. You've been your father's right hand in battle. And suddenly, you are the Sultan. There's no warm-up period, no time to ease into it. The British are still in your territory. Armies are still moving. Decisions have to be made yesterday. Tipu doesn't blink. One of his first acts as ruler. Take command of the war effort himself. And here's where you really see his style. Hyder Ali was a brilliant general, but Tipu thinks bigger. He's not just fighting to survive the war. He's already thinking about how to make Mysore strong enough to never be at the mercy of the British again. In 1784, after years of bloody fighting, Tipu manages to sign the Treaty of Mangalore. And this is huge, because unlike most treaties the East India Company forces on Indian rulers, this one isn't humiliating. It's on equal terms. In fact, it's one of the last treaties the British ever signed in India that didn't tilt heavily in their favor. That alone tells you the kind of leverage Tipu had. With the war over, for now, he turns inward. And here's where he starts to transform Mysore from just another regional kingdom into something far more formidable. He restructures the administration. He centralizes revenue collection, so the state actually knows what it's earning. He invests in agriculture, irrigation, and new industries: silk, sugar, sandalwood. He starts pushing for more advanced weaponry, more disciplined troops, and stronger fortifications. And maybe most importantly, he keeps looking outward. Tipu isn't naive. He knows the British are only pausing, not quitting. So he starts building diplomatic ties with France, the Ottoman Empire, even Afghanistan. Anyone who might help him keep the British in check. In just a few years, Mysore starts to look different, stronger. Not just a kingdom playing defense, but a state that could take the fight to its enemies. And it's in this environment, with his kingdom modernizing and his armies getting sharper, that Tipu begins experimenting with the weapon that will make him legendary: rockets. Because Tipu Sultan isn't just planning to fight the next war, he's planning to fight it on his own terms. When most people picture 18th century warfare, they think muskets, cannons, maybe a few bayonets glinting in the sun. They don't think rockets. But in Mysore, Tipu Sultan was about to change that. Here's the thing. The concept wasn't entirely new. Indian armies had been using primitive rockets for centuries, but they were mostly small, unreliable, and dangerous to the guy firing them as much as to the enemy. What Tipu did, and this is the genius part, was turn them from gimmicks into weapons of war. He and his engineers took those flimsy paper or wooden tubes and replaced them with iron cylinders. Iron meant more gunpowder. More gunpowder meant more range, up to 2 kilometers, and a much bigger explosion when it landed. Attach that to a long bamboo shaft, and you had a projectile that could be fired in volleys, screaming through the air like some kind of 18th century missile barrage. And if you're thinking, sure, but how scary could that be? Imagine being a British soldier, used to the disciplined rhythm of musket volleys, suddenly hearing this horrific, hissing howl as dozens of flaming arcs come raining down, unpredictable, erratic, exploding in your ranks, scattering your formation. The chaos alone was worth as much as the actual damage. Tipu didn't just stockpile these things. He trained rocket troops, organized units that could unleash wave after wave. He used them to soften enemy lines before cavalry charges, to break sieges, to force the British to fight on his terms. The British, by the way, they were obsessed. Letters home described these metal rockets as terrifying and unlike anything in European warfare. Some even wrote about the strange, corkscrewing trails of smoke that seemed to hunt the men they were aimed at. And here's the irony. The British would eventually steal the idea. A man named William Congreve studied captured Mysorean rockets after Tipu's death and used them to create the famous Congreve rockets of the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812. You know that rocket's red glare from the US national anthem? Yeah, those rockets trace their lineage straight back to Tipu Sultan's workshops in Mysore. For Tipu, though, these rockets weren't just about military innovation. They were psychological weapons. They told the British, you are not invincible. We can beat you at your own game, or invent a new one. And every time they lit up the sky, they carried the same message. The Tiger of Mysore was not going to be hunted quietly. All right, so here's the part of the Tipu Sultan story that doesn't always get the same spotlight as his battlefield heroics. Because yes, he was a warrior. Yes, he was the Tiger of Mysore. But he was also a builder, in the literal and metaphorical sense. And like all great reformers, what he built said a lot about what he feared. Tipu knew that swords and cannons alone wouldn't save Mysore. If the British couldn't take you in battle, they'd take you in trade. If they couldn't beat your army, they'd bleed your economy dry. So, he decides to make Mysore so self-sufficient, so well-organized, that it could survive any siege, military or economic. First step, money and land. Tipu centralizes the revenue system, meaning no more feudal middlemen skimming off whatever they want before the state sees a coin. He improves land measurement so taxes are fair. Well, fair for the time, and so the government actually knows what its resources are worth. He invests in irrigation projects because in India, food security is security. And then, he turns to the economy like a general planning a siege. Silk, sugar, sandalwood. These aren't just luxuries. They're high-value exports, products you can control. So Tipu creates state monopolies. If you want Mysorean silk, you buy it from the state. No middlemen. No British traders getting their hands on it. This isn't isolation. It's strategy. Tipu still trades with the outside world, but on his terms. And speaking of the outside world, let's talk diplomacy. Tipu knows he can't take the British alone, so he starts looking for friends, and not just neighbors. He reaches out to France, because the French and British have their own little blood feud going on. He sends envoys to the Ottoman Empire, the spiritual and political heavyweight of the Muslim world at the time. He even flirts with alliances as far as Afghanistan. The message is clear. Mysore might be one kingdom in southern India, but it's part of a bigger game. And Tipu's playing on the world board. And here's where you really see the man's vision. Military modernization. This isn't some medieval army swinging swords in loose formation. Tipu reorganizes his forces with European-style training. He upgrades firearms. He strengthens fortifications. If the British are bringing the latest technology to India, Tipu's response is, fine. I'll have it too. And maybe better. He's also a patron of science and technology. He sends envoys abroad, not just to sign treaties, but to learn about new weapons, new manufacturing techniques, new ways to run a state. He wants Mysore's forges to burn hotter, its workshops to turn out rifles and rockets that can match anything made in London or Paris. It's this blend, the sword and the plough, the cannon and the ledger, that makes Tipu so dangerous to the British. Because he's not just preparing for the next battle, he's preparing for the next generation. Here's the thing about power. The moment you start to look too strong, someone's going to test you. And in Tipu's case, someone is the biggest empire builder of the 18th century, the British East India Company, plus a few of its not-so-willing friends. It's 1790, and the Third Anglo-Mysore War is about to begin. The British have learned from their earlier clashes with Tipu and his father, and they're not coming alone. They've stitched together an alliance with the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad. Three powers, united not because they love each other, but because they all agree. Tipu Sultan is getting too strong. And if you've ever played one of those strategy games where everyone suddenly gangs up on you because you're winning, yeah, that's exactly what's about to happen. The war is brutal. Tipu's rockets scream over battlefields, causing chaos among British lines, just like before. But this time, the numbers are different. When you're fighting one enemy, you can maneuver. When you're fighting three at once, you start running out of places to go. Tipu still pulls off moments of brilliance, ambushing supply lines, retaking lost ground. But the tide is against him. The British and their allies push deep into Mysore, and then comes the moment that turns into pure humiliation. The Treaty of Seringapatam, 1792. Tipu has to hand over half of his kingdom, half, and as if that wasn't enough, he's forced to pay a massive indemnity. But here's the part that really twists the knife. As collateral, the British take two of Tipu's young sons as hostages. Picture it. These boys, dressed in royal silks, walking through the camp of the very men trying to dismantle their father's kingdom. The British officers are polite. They know this is as much theatre as it is politics. But the symbolism is devastating. For Tipu, it's not just a loss of land or money. It's a personal insult. A reminder that the British can touch his family. And yet, he doesn't break. Tipu pays the indemnity, gets his sons back, and starts rebuilding. Because in his mind, this war isn't over. It's just on pause. If anything, the Third Anglo-Mysore War proves what Tipu already knew. If the British want him gone, they'll keep coming until he's dead. So the next time they march on Mysore, he's going to make them pay for every single inch. And when that day comes, he's not going to fight for survival. He's going to fight to the death. It's 1799, and the British are coming back. This time for everything. The Fourth Anglo-Mysore War isn't a border dispute. It isn't a grudge match. It's an execution. The British have decided that Tipu Sultan is too dangerous to leave alive, and they're bringing enough firepower to make sure he never rules again. Tipu knows it. You can feel it in the way he moves in those final months. He's not scrambling for peace talks. He's not hedging his bets with some desperate alliance. He's preparing to go down swinging. The British march on Seringapatam, Tipu's capital, a fortress city ringed by walls, moats, and the Kaveri River. They have around 50,000 troops, British regulars, East India Company forces, and allies from Hyderabad. Inside the city, maybe half that number. But those defenders have one thing the attackers don't: the belief that their ruler will fight beside them until the very end. The siege begins. For weeks, British guns pound the walls. Rockets streak out from the city in reply, arcing fire into enemy trenches. Food grows scarce. Morale thins. But Tipu, he's everywhere, inspecting defences, directing artillery, refusing every suggestion to escape or negotiate. And here's the thing. This isn't just stubborn pride. For Tipu, surrender isn't an option. He's seen what the British do to rulers who give up. If they take him alive, they'll turn him into a trophy. If they kill him in battle, at least he chooses how his story ends. On May 4, 1799, the British launch their final assault. The walls are breached, chaos floods in, fighting erupts in the streets. Brutal, close-quarters combat. Tipu is in the thick of it, sword in hand, wearing his armour. There's a moment, maybe myth, maybe truth, when a British soldier offers him quarter, and Tipu supposedly replies, "Better to live one day as a tiger than 1,000 years as a sheep." Whether he actually said it doesn't matter. It's exactly the kind of thing he would have said. Moments later, Tipu Sultan is struck down near one of the gates. When the fighting ends, the British find his body under a pile of his men. He didn't run. He didn't hide. The Tiger of Mysore died in the city he swore to defend. When the British officers see him, some are shocked. They'd expected him to slip away, to live in exile. Instead, they got a corpse, and a legend they couldn't kill. Even in victory, the British understood something. You can defeat a man, but you can't unwrite the story he leaves behind. And Tipu Sultan's story was written in fire. So, the tiger is gone. The British have taken Seringapatam. They've carted off his treasures, gold, jewels, his famous tiger-shaped automaton that growled when you turned the crank. They've dismantled his kingdom. On paper, it's over. But history doesn't run on paper. It runs on memory. And Tipu Sultan left a memory you couldn't erase with a treaty or a musket ball. Let's start with the rockets. Those crude, terrifying Mysorean rockets the British cursed on the battlefield. They didn't just vanish when Tipu died. The British captured hundreds of them and studied them. A man named William Congreve took what he learned from Tipu's designs and developed the Congreve rocket. Those rockets would be fired in the Napoleonic Wars. In the War of 1812, they're the rocket's red glare in the American national anthem. So, if you've ever heard that line and pictured some purely European invention, surprise, it traces back to an Indian king the British couldn't forget. Then, there's his political legacy. In India, Tipu became, and remains, one of the earliest symbols of armed resistance to British expansion. He didn't just fight for territory. He fought against the idea that the British could dictate India's future. For 18th century India, that was revolutionary. Now, depending on who you ask, the picture gets complicated. Some hail him as a patriot and reformer. Others criticize him for his treatment of certain communities and for being ruthless toward conquered territories. That's the thing with powerful rulers. Their legacy is always contested. Was he a freedom fighter? A tyrant? The truth is, he was both, because history doesn't hand out simple roles. But whether you see him as hero or villain, you can't deny what he accomplished in less than 2 decades of rule. He stared down the most powerful empire on earth. He modernized his kingdom's economy, army, and administration. He fought and died on his feet. Even the British, who had every reason to paint him as a villain, couldn't help but respect his courage. One officer wrote that Tipu was the most determined enemy the company ever faced in India. Today, in southern India, his name still stirs emotions. You can find statues of him, debates about him, even political fights over his legacy. More than 220 years after his death, people are still arguing about who Tipu Sultan really was. And maybe that's the real sign of his lasting power. Because the men the British truly erased from history, no one argues about them. They're just gone. But the Tiger of Mysore? He's still pacing the edges of our memory, teeth bared, daring us to decide what we think of him. You could strip away the 18th century uniforms, the palaces, the swords, replace it all with modern weapons and politics, and the story would still make sense. Because Tipu wasn't just fighting battles, he was fighting time. He was trying to prove that a regional power, armed with brains, courage, and a willingness to innovate, could hold its own against a global empire. And that's a story that's still happening, just with different uniforms and different empires. Tipu's rockets, they're more than just a neat historical footnote. They're proof that innovation isn't the monopoly of any one nation or continent. In an era when Europe liked to think it was decades ahead of the rest of the world, here was an Indian king creating weapons so effective, the British copied them. It's a reminder that technology, and the fear it inspires, can flow both ways. His politics, complex. His methods, sometimes brutal. But the through line of his life is resistance, not the kind born out of desperation, but the kind built on preparation. He didn't wait for the British to tighten the noose. He fortified his economy, modernized his army, and searched for allies. And here's where it gets really interesting. Tipu lost. Completely. His kingdom was dismantled, his body left on the field, and yet, the memory of him outlived the empire that destroyed him. The British Raj? Gone? Tipu Sultan? Still in textbooks, still in debates, still in the political bloodstream of India more than 2 centuries later. Why does he still matter? Because he forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What makes someone a hero? What makes them a tyrant? Can they be both at the same time? And if the answer is yes, what does that say about how we judge the past? History is full of men who claimed they would rather die than surrender. Most of them didn't mean it. Tipu did. So whether you admire him, despise him, or can't decide, remember this. The Tiger of Mysore's roar didn't end in 1799. It's still echoing. And if you listen closely, it's not just a sound from the past. It's a challenge. He was more than a king, more than a soldier. He was a strategist, an innovator, and a man who dared to believe that an empire could be stopped, even if the world thought otherwise. In life, he was the Tiger of Mysore. In death, he became something harder to kill, a symbol, a reminder that courage is not measured by victory, but by the refusal to kneel, even when the odds are impossible. And so, centuries later, his roar still carries, challenging every empire, past and present, that would try to tame it.